The Boston skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Millennium Tower penthouse. Olivia Harlow stood trembling, her fingers nervously twisting the delicate silver bracelet around her wrist. The marble floors, designer furniture, and abstract art that had surrounded her for the past 4 years now felt cold and foreign. She watched her husband Ethan Blackwood swirl his bourbon, his expression unreadable in the dim evening light. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. Ethan barely looked up from his drink. At 42, he possessed the sharp features and calculated demeanor that had helped him build Blackwood Properties into a real estate empire spanning the East Coast. His tailored suit hugged his athletic frame, and his dark hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour. "What is it?" he asked, his voice clipped and distracted as he scrolled through emails on his phone. Olivia took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan slowly placed his glass on the side table and looked directly at her for the first time that evening. His piercing gray eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Olivia nodded, a hesitant smile forming. "About 8 weeks along. I just found out yesterday," and a harsh laugh cut her off. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. "How convenient." "What do you mean?" Confusion clouded her features as she took a step toward him. He turned, his handsome face twisted into a cold smile. "The board meeting next month, where I'm announcing my succession plan." "The timing is impeccable, Olivia. You think I planned this?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "Didn't you?" Ethan moved closer, towering over her. "A baby ensures your place in my life. Ensures your access to my money for the next 18 years at least." Olivia felt as though she'd been slapped. "That's absurd." "I love you. I thought you'd be happy." "Happy?" He laughed again, the sound lacking any warmth. "My father warned me about women like you. Beautiful, charming, and ultimately calculating." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. "Your father never gave me a chance. He decided I was a gold digger the moment we met. Turns out he was right." Ethan walked to his desk and pulled out his checkbook. The scratch of his pen filled the room as Olivia stood frozen in shock. "Here," he said, tearing out the check and holding it toward her. "This should cover any inconveniences." Olivia stared at the check, the 6-figure sum blurring through her tears. "You think you can buy me off?" "This is our child, Ethan." "Is it?" His voice turned to ice. "We both know you've been unhappy lately. All those late nights at your gallery, exhibitions, the artist friends." "You're accusing me of cheating?" Olivia gasped. "I've never been unfaithful to you." Ethan shrugged. "Take the money or don't. Either way, I want you out of this apartment tonight. You can't be serious." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I've never been more serious." He tossed the check onto the coffee table between them. "You have an hour to pack your things." Olivia's legs nearly gave out beneath her. 4 years of marriage dissolved in minutes. She thought of the nursery. She had already begun planning in her mind the future she had imagined for them as a family. "I don't want your money," she said quietly, finding strength in her words. "But I won't beg you to believe me either." She turned and walked slowly to their bedroom, each step heavy with grief. As she packed a small suitcase with shaking hands, memories flooded through her mind. Their wedding day at the Boston Public Garden, holidays in the Hamptons, quiet evenings watching the city lights. When she emerged 30 minutes later, Ethan stood in the same spot, his expression unchanged. She placed her key on the table, left the check untouched, and walked to the door. "You'll regret this," she said softly, not as a threat, but as a sad prediction. The last thing she saw before the elevator doors closed was Ethan turning away, already reaching for his phone. already moving on with his life, as though she had never existed. Rain pelted the bus windows as it pulled into Portland's Central Station. Olivia stepped out, clutching her suitcase to her chest like a shield. The Pacific Northwest air felt different from Boston's heavier, with moisture but somehow lighter on her shoulders. 3 days of travel had left her exhausted, her body reminding her of the tiny life growing inside her. She navigated through the station, following directions to the small coffee shop where Naomi had promised to meet her. 4 years since they'd seen each other, connected only through occasional texts and social media likes. Yet when Olivia had called, sobbing, Naomi hadn't hesitated. Come to Portland. Stay with me as long as you need. The bell jingled as Olivia pushed open the door to Brood Awakening. Naomi spotted her immediately, rushing over with open arms. Her purple-streaked hair and paint-splattered jeans were a stark contrast to the sleek professionals Olivia had surrounded herself with in Boston. "Oh my God, look at you," Naomi whispered, pulling back to examine Olivia's face. "You're exhausted. Let's get you home." Naomi's home was a cozy second-floor apartment above a bookstore in the Alberta Arts District. The space was small, but vibrant walls covered in Naomi's paintings, plants crowding every windowsill, mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. "It's not a penthouse," Naomi said, showing Olivia to the pull-out couch that would be her bed. "But it's safe, and it's yours for as long as you need it." That night, as rain continued to drum against the windows, Olivia finally let herself break down completely. Naomi held her, listening as the whole story poured out. "He just discarded me, like I meant nothing. 4 years together, and he didn't even hesitate." Naomi's eyes flashed with anger. "Ethan Blackwood can rot in hell. You and this baby deserve better." Days turned into weeks. Olivia tried to ignore the morning sickness as she searched for jobs. Her resume art history degree, gallery coordinator experience, meant little in Portland's competitive market. Each rejection email felt like another reminder of Ethan's prediction that she couldn't survive without him. What about this? Naomi pointed to a listing one evening. "The Morning Brew is hiring servers. It's not glamorous, but the tips are decent, and they have good health care for employees." The cafe owner, Trevor, was a gruff man with kind eyes who hired Olivia on the spot. "Can you start tomorrow? 6 a.m. sharp?" The work was exhausting hours on her feet, memorizing orders, navigating the crowded kitchen. Her first paycheck seemed pitiful compared to what she was used to. But as she slipped it into her newly opened bank account, Olivia felt something she hadn't in weeks: pride. "I made this," she whispered to her growing belly one night. "Just me, and I'll keep making more for us." When her pregnancy began to show, Trevor moved her to less physically demanding tasks. Regular customers left her extra tips, sometimes with notes of encouragement. One elderly woman, Gertie, who came every morning for her one indulgence of a vanilla latte, began bringing baby clothes she'd knitted. "My daughter never had children," she explained, pressing a tiny yellow sweater into Olivia's hands. "These should go to someone who'll appreciate them." At her 5-month checkup, the technician asked if she wanted to know the baby's sex. "A boy," the woman said, pointing to the screen. "See?" That night, Olivia sat on Naomi's fire escape, watching the sunset paint Portland's skyline in gold and pink. "Hello, little one," she whispered, cradling her belly. "It's just you and me against the world, but we're going to be okay." A sudden flutter, the first definitive kick she'd felt, seemed to answer her promise. Olivia smiled through her tears, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. "Mom, have you seen my biology textbook?" Lucas called, his voice echoing through their small but tidy suburban home. Olivia looked up from her nursing charts. "Check under the couch. That's where I found it last time." At 16, Lucas Harlow stood nearly 6 feet tall, with his father's strong jawline and piercing gray eyes. But his expressions carried Olivia's warmth. He dashed into the living room, dark hair flopping across his forehead as he dove to look under the furniture. "Found it," he announced triumphantly. Olivia smiled, marveling at how quickly the years had passed. It seemed like yesterday that she'd been rocking him in the cramped apartment she and Naomi had shared. Terrified of failing as a single mother. So much had changed since then. After 2 years at the Morning Brew, Olivia had enrolled in nursing school, balancing classes with motherhood and part-time work. Those years were a blur of exhaustion studying after Lucas fell asleep, dragging herself to clinical rotations at dawn, counting pennies for groceries. Now, as a pediatric nurse at Portland Children's Hospital, she finally had stability. Their modest home, purchased 3 years ago, represented everything she'd fought for: security, independence, a future for Lucas. "Don't forget we're meeting with Miss Patterson about your college applications this afternoon," Olivia reminded him. Lucas groaned dramatically. "She's going to make me apply to Harvard again." "Would that be so terrible?" Olivia asked lightly, though the thought of her son at Ethan's alma mater created a complicated knot in her stomach. "I'd rather go to MIT or Stanford. Better engineering programs." Lucas slung his backpack over his shoulder. "Besides, I'm not legacy anywhere." Those elite East Coast schools love their family connections. The unintentional barb stung. Lucas knew only the barest details about his father, a businessman in Boston who hadn't wanted a family. Olivia had never told him Ethan's name or shown him pictures. What would be the point of connecting her brilliant, kind-hearted son to a man who had rejected him before birth? Later that day, sitting in Miss Patterson's office, Olivia listened with pride as the counselor listed Lucas's accomplishments. Perfect SAT scores, president of the robotics club, 3 published research papers with Portland State University's engineering department, Miss Patterson said. Lucas could go almost anywhere. But with his financial situation, we need to be strategic about scholarships. On the drive home, Lucas was uncharacteristically quiet. "What's on your mind?" Olivia asked. Lucas stared out the window. "Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if you'd stayed in Boston? If you'd stayed with him?" Olivia gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Sometimes. But then I look at you, and I know I made the right choice. Even though it was harder. Especially because it was harder." She reached over to squeeze his hand. "The things that matter most rarely come easily." That night, after Lucas went to bed, Olivia allowed herself to do something she hadn't in years. She searched for Ethan Blackwood. Online. His company had grown exponentially, now one of the largest real estate development firms in the country. Recent photos showed him at charity galas, a much younger woman on his arm. His hair now silver at the temples, but his face still handsome and cold. According to the business profiles, Blackwood Properties had recently established a significant scholarship endowment at several universities, including MIT. The irony wasn't lost on Olivia. Her son might end up benefiting from his father's philanthropy without either of them knowing it. She closed the laptop, feeling the familiar mixture of anger and gratitude that had defined her relationship with Ethan over the years. Anger at his callousness, gratitude for the strength she'd found in his absence. "We made it without you," she whispered to the darkness. "We made it because you weren't there." The Massachusetts Institute of Technology campus bustled with activity as Lucas wandered through the engineering buildings, trying to contain his excitement. The Blackwood Scholarship for Innovative Design had brought him to Boston for a special weekend program, along with 19 other finalists from across the country. "And this is our advanced robotics lab," the tour guide explained, opening the door to a space that made Lucas's heart race. Equipment he'd only read about, Projects more ambitious than anything his high school could accommodate. Can we try anything? Asked a girl beside him, her enthusiasm matching his own. Not today, the guide laughed. But this afternoon you'll meet Mr. Blackwood himself. His foundation funds all of this. Lucas had researched the Blackwood Scholarship extensively, but knew little about the man behind it. Some tech billionaire, he'd assumed, who decided to invest in the next generation of engineers. Later, in MIT's Grand Reception Hall, Lucas adjusted his tie nervously. His mother had insisted on buying him a new suit for the occasion, though. They could barely afford it. "This could be your ticket to MIT," she'd said, tears in her eyes as she helped him pack. "I'm so proud of you, Lucas." He wished she could have come with him, but the scholarship only covered his travel expenses. Besides, she couldn't miss shifts at the hospital. They needed every dollar with college approaching. A hush fell over the room as a distinguished man in his late 50s entered, accompanied by university officials. Even from a distance, Lucas could sense his commanding presence. "Welcome, scholars," the man began, his voice carrying effortlessly. "I'm Ethan Blackwood." Something about the name tickled the back of Lucas's mind, but he dismissed it, focusing instead on Blackwood's speech about innovation and opportunity. During the reception that followed, Lucas found himself face to face with the benefactor. Up close, he noticed the man's penetrating gray eyes, so similar to his own that it was almost disconcerting. Lucas Harlow, Blackwood read from his name tag, Portland, Oregon. "Tell me about your project." Lucas explained his design for a more efficient prosthetic hand, inspired by his volunteer work at his mother's hospital. As he spoke, he noticed Blackwood studying him with increasing intensity. "Your last name, Harlow. Any relation to the Harlows of Chicago?" Lucas shook his head. "No, sir. It's just my mom and me." Something flickered across Blackwood's face. "And your father?" The personal question caught Lucas off guard. "I never knew him." Blackwood seemed about to say more when they were interrupted by a program coordinator. The moment passed, but throughout the weekend, Lucas noticed Blackwood watching him from across rooms. On his last evening in Boston, unable to shake his curiosity, Lucas used the hotel computer to search Ethan Blackwood Boston. Article after article detailed the man's business success, philanthropy, and occasionally his personal life. One photo from 16 years ago made Lucas freeze. It showed a younger Blackwood at a gallery opening, his arm around a beautiful woman with familiar features, his mother's features. The caption read, "Real estate mogul Ethan Blackwood and wife Olivia Harlow at the opening of the Newbury Street Gallery." Lucas stared at the screen, his mind racing. The timing, the resemblance, his mother's reluctance to discuss his father, it all suddenly made terrible sense. He printed the article with shaking hands and tucked it into his suitcase. Tomorrow, he would return to Portland with more questions than answers, and a burning need to confront the mother who had kept half his identity hidden for 16 years. Olivia knew something was wrong the moment Lucas returned from Boston. He barely spoke during the drive home from the airport, his responses clipped, his eyes avoiding hers. "Did something happen at MIT?" she finally asked as they entered their house. "You don't seem excited anymore." Lucas dropped his suitcase in the hallway and turned to face her. "Why didn't you tell me who my father is?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Olivia sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "How did you find out?" Lucas pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. The photograph of her and Ethan, young and seemingly happy, stared back accusingly. "He's the one who created the scholarship I'm competing for," Lucas said, his voice tight with emotion. "I spent the whole weekend with him, and neither of us knew. Or maybe he did. He kept looking at me strangely." "He didn't know," Olivia whispered. "He never wanted to know." The story poured out of her then, the pregnancy, Ethan's accusations, the night he'd forced her to leave with nothing but a suitcase and her dignity. "I wasn't trying to hide who he was," she finished, tears streaming down her face. "I was protecting you from knowing you weren't wanted." Lucas paced the small living room. "I need to see him again. I need to hear his side." "Lucas, please, I'm going back to Boston," he said firmly. "The scholarship finalists are announced next week. I have a reason to be there." Olivia realized with a sinking heart that her son had inherited her stubbornness, along with Ethan's determination. Nothing would stop him now. 5 days later, Lucas stood in the lobby of Blackwood Properties headquarters, his heart pounding as he gave his name to the receptionist. "I don't have an appointment," he admitted, "but it's important." To his surprise, he was escorted upstairs almost immediately. Ethan Blackwood stood as he entered the office, his expression unreadable. "Lucas Harlow," Ethan said carefully. "I had a feeling you might return." "You know who I am, don't you?" Lucas asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Ethan nodded slowly. "I suspected when I saw you. You have my mother's eyes." "My eyes." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit." For an hour, Lucas listened as Ethan offered his version of the past, his suspicions, his pride, his subsequent regrets. "I tried to find your mother years later," Ethan admitted, "but she'd disappeared completely. I assumed she wanted it that way." "She rebuilt her life from nothing," Lucas said, unable to keep the accusation from his voice. "She worked double shifts to put herself through nursing school while raising me alone." A knock interrupted them. The door opened to reveal Olivia, her face pale but determined. "Mom?" Lucas gasped. "How did you? Your roommate told me where you'd gone." She stepped into the office, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "Hello, Ethan." Ethan stood slowly, looking as though he'd seen a ghost. Olivia. The years fell away as they stared at each other. She, the struggling nurse who had raised a remarkable son. He, the billionaire whose empire had cost him his soul. "You look well," Ethan said finally. Olivia smiled faintly. "So do you. Success agrees with you. Not as much as I thought it would." His gaze moved between her and Lucas. "I made a terrible mistake, Olivia. I've made many mistakes." "Yes," she agreed simply. "You have." Lucas watched his parents, two strangers, connected by an unbreakable thread, and felt the weight of 16 years of absence pressing on all of them. "I don't expect forgiveness," Ethan continued, moving around his desk. "But I'd like a chance to know my son, and perhaps," his eyes lingered on Olivia, "to make amends where I can." Olivia looked at Lucas, leaving the decision to him. At 16, he stood at the threshold of his future, suddenly with more options than he'd ever imagined. "Possible. I think," Lucas said slowly, "we could start with dinner. Just talking. Nothing more promised than that." As they left the office together, not quite a family, but no longer completely strangers, Olivia felt the burden she'd carried for so long begin to lighten. The fortune that had cast such a long shadow over their lives might finally bring some light instead. Ethan held the door for them both, his hand hesitating near Olivia's back, but not quite touching her. There was so much history between them, so much pain and missed opportunity. But there was also Lucas living proof that sometimes the most precious treasures come from our greatest heartbreaks. "Where should we go?" Ethan asked, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain.